Welcome to World Online Racing Console Tier 3 Season 21 at the British Grand Prix. Hopefully it'll be a great one. This circuit almost never disappoints in league racing, as it's pretty much one big battle zone. However, we're just booting into the event, so within due course we will be underway. Just for a few bits of context, entering this event you do have a championship leader of Connor, followed by Knights, then Mad Dogs. However, that gap in top three, only 3 singular points, so do keep an eye out on how that may alter, as we really never know what is going to happen. As, to say the least, it's going to be a great session. As let's just quickly sort this stuff out, as we are going to chuck on the base settings really for it, as the drivers now have, I don't know, maybe 30 seconds or so to pick out a setup, pick out their run plan, and then try and get out on track. Of course, only 18 minutes here for qualifying means every single lap is precious, but at the same time, one subtle mistake can lead to their session being over and done with and them starting at the back of the grid. Today, unfortunately, only 10 drivers, so hopefully a mistake in quali like this shouldn't be too massive of an issue. As we can see the first car coming out, as it's VXR working their way through the loop. Now in the Red Bull, in terms of the constructors, they're currently the championship leaders with only a 12-point gap over Williams and then a 16-point gap over Ferrari. So if they can stand strong, they should be perfectly fine after this race. As of course you do have 3 rounds left of this season. It's here today at Great Britain, then I believe it's Monza, Suzuka and Abu Dhabi off the top of my head. As you can see, the Red Bull now working their way up into Copse Corner. The livery really just striking quite old plain, to say the least, as VXR now works their way through Magus and Beckett's. This is really a test of the driver's ability, because you are chucking your car left, right. Within about 6 seconds or whatever, you're through that section and on to the Wellington straight, not Wellington, my bad, Hanger Straight. Getting the two mixed up. As through Stoke Corner, nice and easy, you can pretty much take it semi-flat throughout, just a slight lift off the throttle, and then you can go charging after that, as the Red Bull now leaving Club and the Vale Chicane to start their first run of the day. What can Red Bull do? Up to turn 1 they go now, try and get nice and wide on entry for Farm Curve, go through Abbey, just keep the momentum running, heavy brakes for Village, then round loop, take a wide-ish line on the entry, kind of want to be in the middle of track, as now for Raintree just kiss the apex and go straight out wide, as you now propel yourself down the Wellington straight up into Brooklands. Really use as much curve as possible there, as it's an absolute best first sector. Of course, the game does not know what's the best sector until everyone's set a valid sector in each part of the track. So for the time being, we are going to say the fastest man on track is this Red Bull, as through Cobbs, pretty much flat out there. Don't think they lifted whatsoever. As now into Magus and Beckett's, pretty much flat through the first 2 or 3 of these corners. A lift down throttle through Beckett's and then get back on it as you go through Chapel Curve. As you now work your way down the Hanger Straight up towards Stoke Corner, it's again absolute best in the middle sector, but still first driver to set a middle sector. As now down through the Vale Bank into Vale Chicane, really attacking the curbs there, try and use every single inch of the track possible. Is over the line now. What will it be? It's a 25.6 to kickstart this qualifying session, as Assi is now working their way around the final corner. Now it's a 25.8 for the Mercedes. We will tune in with the Williams of Willow as they now go through Vale, through Club now, and it's a 25.4, absolute best there for the man in blue. as now Mulder over the line. It's second fastest for the McLaren. RWB now out of Vale. The Aston Martin home race, literally 2 miles outside of Silverstone. It's only third fastest for the time being, as Mad Dogs, he's third in championship, could take championship lead here today, and it's only going to be fifth for the V-Carb, as now Poor is working their way around the final corner in the McLaren. It's only 8 fastest, 6 tenths. Currently your field spread, as we are about to see Simon start their run here today. One of the 2 cars yet to do a run. Knight is on an outlap going through Village, as you can see on your track map on the bottom right hand side corner. However, your main focus here is this Ferrari, as you can now see them work their way through Village. Rather tight line, swoops in across the apex, opens it up on the exit, and now this is where your battery would be getting deployed as you work your way down the back straight. It's a 27.0 at the end of the first sector. Takes a rather wide line through Brooklands, but that allows them to really attack the inside in Luffield, out of Luffield through Woodcote. Now it's a very small kink, but it's its own unique corner here. Of course, 17 corners make up this Silverstone circuit, and they're all pretty much one big battle complex, as you can go wheel to wheel for majority of the lap. As now through Magus and Beckett's, the grandstand to the left, fans getting a lovely view of the Scuderia Red as they work their way through there. 1 minute 2.0 at the end of the middle sector. Up to Stowe corner now. There is, I believe it's Poor, letting the Ferrari by, as it seems like it's a rather impressive lap for the Italian team. As now around the final few corners, what will it be for Simon? It will be a 25.3, fastest lap of this session. Of course, there's still 11.5 minutes, so do not go anywhere, as there is still quite a lot to change. For all we know, Paul will end up going fastest of them all. But that is the joy of qualifying. You can have really big surprises at the very end of it. As now Knight at the end of the first sector, it's a 27.0, pretty much identical to the Ferrari in the first part of the lap. Can he match what he could do? As now through Luffield into Woodcote, now really just setting it up down the National Pit Straight into Copse Corner. Now the Sauber really using full track width to its advantage. You can just see by that extra wide entry into Maggots and Beckett's, and that just shows the downforce of these cars being able to stick at such high speed through that S section. It's a 1 minute 2.0, an absolute best in the middle sector. It's quicker than what Simon did in his current provisional pole setting lap. As now down Vale Bank into Vale Chicane. The Sauber looking rather convincing for a decent lap out of the final corner now. What will it be? It will only be second fastest, and only 0.08 of a second off of the Ferrari. A mighty effort for the Sauber, but as things stand, the top 3 all split by only 94. I want to say 94. No, 94 thousandths of a second. See, that's why you don't second guess, because otherwise you'd get it extremely wrong. As now we can see some cars out on an outlap. For example, VXR is on a second run. They're only about 2.5 tenths off pole or whatever, as they work their way through the first part of the lap. Now the Red Bull just overtaking that Williams into Village, and now out of the loop and through Aintree they go. DRS wide open as they climb their way down the back straight into Brooklands. It's an ever so slight improvement. It's only 58 thousandths of a second going in the way of the Red Bull after that first sector compared to his current best. Out of there now, working their way down the National Pit Straight, a very historic straight. Of course, if you're a long-term F1 fan, that's where they used to start in the first ever British GP. Now it's of course the Hamilton Straight, or the International Pit Straight as it's known. As through Magnussen Beckett's the Red Bull really trying to get every single bit of performance out of the car. It's an absolute best in middle sector. It's a 1 minute 2.0 and a tenth and a half up from what they are currently doing. Could this be provisional pole here? We've got 8.5 minutes left of the session as the Red Bull dives into the pit lane. He's went, you know what, I'll take another shot later on. I know I've got the pace. Let's not ruin a set of tyres now as we can tune in with Mulder in the McLaren. McLaren currently 5th in the championship and currently running 4th and 10th in this qualifying session, with Paul being one of the 2 drivers and Mulder being a reserve here today. As now through Luffield they go out onto the national pit straight once again. The McLaren, it hits such a high top speed. It's about 210 miles an hour or 360 kilometers an hour just entering Copse Corner on its own. As now through Magnussen Beckett's detection zone, literally that white line there, as it's now chugged the car through the S's. If a car snaps there, it will be a very big mishap, as it's a tenth up after the middle part of the lap. It says it's an absolute best. Going through Stowe Corner now, you can just see how much speed that McLaren can carry through it on its own. Just proves the downforce of these machines out of the final slower speed corner now. Through Club they go. It's a 25.4. It's an improvement, and it splits them between AMS Knight and Willow by only 2 thousandths of a second to that Williams. As Essie going through the middle part of the lap now. Is it a competitive run? No, it isn't. RWB, however, in that Aston Martin, leaving Stowe Corner now, working their way down the hill. Willow goes to the top of the timing ladder. It's a 25.326. But then Duncan goes even quicker. Can RWB go quicker than that? The Aston Martin cannot, and it'll be 6th for the team in British Racing Green. As Mad Dog's working his way through the middle sector of this lap at the moment. However, for the sake of this grid, it will be interesting to see whether or not this Ferrari can in fact improve. It's 2 tenths up at the end of the middle sector. It's almost certain they will find an improvement here for the Ferrari. It's currently 3rd on grid, just same place as they are in the constructors. Out of final corner now, and it's going to be fastest. It's a 125.199, and that is a good 10th clear of Duncan in the Haas car here today. And that is a mega lap for the Ferrari, currently sitting in 20th in the standings. Only done 2 races, however, and that one finish of the 2 was P5. That's what giving that man currently on provisional pole all his points this season, whereas on the other hand it's Connor who is your championship leader in the other Ferrari. So yeah, it's rather long-winded, this championship. The gap between the two, 52 points, so it is not too open of a gap, as there's still time for that all to come back down to nil. So just keep an eye out in the future races, as the Ferrari really just cooling them tyres down more than anything. You can see that red flashing light on the back of the car. That's the ERS harvesting or saving as they go through the corners. You can tell by the deltas it is nowhere near any means competitive of a lap. As now through Stowe, it should hopefully be into the pit lane for the Ferrari. Yes it is, as Knight, by looks of it, is improving. It's a small gain after that first sector. At the end of the middle, it's an absolute best. It's a 10th improvement. That 10th should put them into at least 2nd if they can hold it. Of course, through Stowe keeps it clean in the Sauber, working their way down into Vale Chicane. What can Knight do, however? Round the final corner for the Sauber. Will it be provisional pole? No, it won't. It will only be 2nd, but 22 thousandths of a second will split Simone and Knight. Boy, oh boy, we are going to have a very compact finish to this session, as, to say the least, time is running out. 3 minutes 40 left on the clock as of now. Pretty much all cars will be wanting to work their way out onto the track within the next few moments, as Cicada has joined us in the Alpine. So we will now have 10 constructors partaking in the main race, as Knight working their way into. Thing is, Mad Dogs has left the pit lane. The man in third in championship, to say the least, having a fairly mediocre qualifying session, currently lining up in P9 of course. He'll be quite mad if he does pull himself up that pecking order, maybe into a top 3, because regarding these drivers out on track, his closest rival's 13 points behind, and they're currently sitting P4. It's the Williams of Willow. So Mad Dogs would rather like to keep it as close between them as possible, but then also if he can bag at least 15 points or 7 points more than what Knights can do in that Sauber, he should take the championship lead post race, as Knights being in the Red Bull to be exact. But you can now see the pit lane cars starting to file out one by one. This is where Mad Dogs is going to want to drop his pace a bit, just so he can get a nice bit of clean track in front of him, as everyone now leaving that pit is on an outlap. They're going to be getting those tyres into the working window of about 82 degrees Celsius on average. That's an ideal spot to start a flying lap. Any higher, then they'll overheat come the time you leave Magus and Beckett's, as Mad Dog now through the first few corners going absolute push in that V-Carb up into Village Curve now. Can the V-Carb find anything, to say the least, as through Village Curve keeps it clean, but you've not seen a singular invalid lap this session so far, as they now work their way down under the Pirelli Bridge up into Brooklands, trying to use all width of the track. It's only 15 thousandths improvement in that first part of lap. It's the best first sector, however, it claims, as now out of Woodcote, heading up towards Cops Corner now. There's Duncan, the man currently in P3, letting the V-car by, as Mad Dogs really pushing on here, as it's going to be an all or nothing attempt for pole position in this session. It's softs on for all cars, so they'll all be desperate to get it out of the middle sector. He's ever so slightly losing time. It's 200ths down after the first two parts of lap. The time has to be found here in Stowe and Vale, as now down through the Vale bank is a little dip as you work your way into an on-camber braking zone of the Vale chicane. Out of the final corner now for the V-Carb. What will it be? It will be sixth fastest for the V-Carb, as Cicada now working their way through the middle sector. It's going to be their first lap of the session, as it got a bit snappy there by the looks of it. It's a 1 minute 2.3 after the first two sectors. It's about 3 tenths off what the Ferrari and the Saubers were doing to set their fastest laps of this session, as Knight currently on a out lap. That's his session over, because he failed to make it to the line. If he kept up with Cicada, even pushed beyond, he would have made it, as now Cicada only 9th fastest in the Alpine. We will now tune in with RWB as they work their way round Stowe Corner. Can the Aston Martin improve their starting position for the team? Of course, based only 2 miles out from circuit. Literally, as you drive in to the track grounds, you see a massive Aramco building. It's only 6th, however, for the Make team, as VXR out of the final corner. It's only going to be 10th for the Red Bull, as we will try and find someone on the run. It will be Mulder, who's working their way through Vale now. It's an absolute best in the middle sector. It's a 10th improvement for the McLaren over the line now, and it's only going to be 5th fastest, as you can now see Simone working his way through the final 2 corners now. Can the Ferrari improve on his provisional pole? It will be a 25.044 for the Ferrari. Out of final corner now goes Duncan. Will he top it? No, he won't. He will only go 3rd fastest, as that is qualifying over in Silverstone. It will be Simone in the Ferrari who grabs your pole position, followed by, off top of my head, it was Knight, and then it was Duncan in P3. As I love when the game bugs out a bit when it comes to wanting to show graphics. Usually doesn't do so. So yeah. Unfortunately we won't actually see that final starting grid. But yeah. As now, we have got 26 laps ahead of us here tonight. It's all or nothing for these 11 drivers, as it's their last chance to make minor setup tweaks before they do go racing here in the United Kingdom. Of course, some drivers may think they had too high of downforce, that's why they couldn't find the time in straight lines, whereas others may go, we had too low of downforce, we're losing a lot in corners. You need to find that right balance. And if I'm right, Parc Fermé being on means that it will have to be fairly subtle tweaks. I was just having a look at the Discord to see how drivers are reacting to the session. Quite a few people questioning what the pole was, and then it was a 25.044 for Simone in the Ferrari. It's a mega lap for the man in 20th in this championship, as we will eventually be going underway here. I'm just quickly checking a setting, but yeah, we are just waiting for the ready up signal, if I'm correct. But yeah, if for those out in the comments or the stream chat, who do you think's going to get your race win? If I was to put my money on anyone, I think it will in fact be the Sauber of Knight, who lines up P2. And if I was to list you my podium, I think it'd have to be Simone in P3, and then for the sake of Mad Dog's championship, I think he has to come home P2, just for the biggest boost possible, because he'll want to try and stay as close to Knight as possible. He'll have to get the podium to limit that deficit with the man in second in championship, only trailing Connor by 7 points. He's lining up on second row, whereas Mad Dog's not even in the top 5 for this race. So only time will tell how this will unravel. Of course, 11 drivers out on track, 10 constructors, as Simone has disconnected. Unfortunately, I don't have him added, so I can't try and re-invite. But in terms of the championship, it could really change in this race. Red Bull out of position, starting 10th on the grid, with only VXR partaking. Then Williams and Ferrari both have a car in the top 4. Racing Bulls also having their one driver partaking, out qualifying the Red Bull. But the main battle is at the top, because it's Red Bull on 80, Williams 68 points and Ferrari 64 points. So a very subtle change can mean everything in this championship. But then not just that, you do have McLaren on 33 points, Aston Martin on 30 points, Mercedes on 29, and Alpine on 22. That is 5th all the way down to 8th, split by just a mere 11 points. Then don't rule out Haas. Duncan having a great qualifying, putting himself in amongst the top 3. He's sitting in the constructor, that's only 9th in the championship with 18 points, all season long. And that was when both drivers raced in Spa-Francorchamps for round 3, and they came home a good P4 and P7. However, at the moment, quite a few of the drivers just talking about their debate over using the mediums or hards in this race, and when, because let's be honest, most of these drivers will want to take a one stop for these 26 laps, and the best way to do the one stop are via using the hards and mediums, but it depends on how they use them. If they pick mediums at start, they'll be quick off the line, but they'll wear out earlier on, and then they'll have the hards to the end, which are a bit more durable. However, would you want to start on hards, go a bit longer and go racing at the end of this race? So the question is pretty much lined out for you. As your 5 red lights now up, as we are now underway for the 7th installation of this 21st season of WOR. As there's Duncan down the inside through the first few corners. He now takes the lead as there's Debris flying out in the background, as Simone, of course, still being AI, plummeting down that pecking order, but it's going to be Duncan who leads tonight, then Willow, as there's Mad Dogs, who's had an amazing start, RWB fending off Mara in the Ferrari, as VXR has found quite a bit of time in the first part of this lap. As let's just quickly set that up, as there are your starting tyres. It's only Mulder on the hards, that's why the McLaren has plummeted in the first few laps, and those on the mediums have pretty much had a fairly decent start, as there's Duncan still leading the field away, the Sauber just tucked in behind. It will be absolutely crucial for this race if Duncan can hold on to this race lead. Of course, 25 points will therefore be going Haas's way, compared to only 18 for the Sauber team, then 15 for Williams in terms of championship. It should promote Mad Dogs down to about 3rd, and Knight into the leaders. There's Willow and Knight, talking of them, going wheel to wheel into Vale. They have a bit of wheel banging, but they've got out mainly cleanly, as now the Sauber progresses onto his second lap, trailing against Duncan, who set a 32.2. It's the first lap, so of course it will always be the first car to cross the line who takes it, as the Sauber starting to lose a bit of time. That's the forfeit from fighting in that first lap, as VXR, lovely move down the inside of Village there on RWB. That is the Red Bull up into P5 now, as they've just really got to keep their head down and work their way up through this field. As just in the background there was Mulder, in fact overtaking his teammate, with Simon having a big recovery drive to make. He started pole here, he's now in 8th, so it's quite high stakes for that Ferrari, as time has been lost to say the least, with him now sitting at the back of this, the leading train, because you can see P8 and 9 already split by over a second. That means Mulder and the McLaren will not be getting any DRS for their efforts this lap as they work their way down the hangar straight. Knight having a little look at trying to make a move on Duncan, just wasn't able to do so. That will mean the Haas works their way through Vale now to lead us onto the 3rd lap here today, with this race still going in the way of the American team, followed by the team in green of Sauber just right behind them. But it's so difficult to pull away on this game, especially at such a high level like this, of course being tier 3. So we will hopefully see this battle rage on for hopefully the duration of this race. All drivers but one starting on the mediums, they'll all be as racy as each other pretty much throughout this race. The undercut will be crucial in terms of strategy, as you could see there, Knight having a slight glance on the exit of Brooklands and that little jolt into Luffield, but the Sauber wasn't able to make room. Tried working his magic, but his trick failed, to say the least. However, if they can keep it clean through Magus and Beckett's, they should have a great chance up into Stowe Corners. They now work their way through the complex. They're currently 3 tenths apart. This is really about how heavy in terms of downforce is your setup as to how much time you'll find through that section. It looks like Duncan found more time, however, and then down this straight, Knight just unable to close in far enough. He only gained about a 1/10.5 in that straight alone. So unfortunately it will be very difficult, as it's already proving. However, once you're alongside, you can pretty much go alongside for the whole duration of the lap, because if you go overtaking into Stowe Corner, you can continue the battle through Vale if you get a good switchback out of thingies. There is ASY or ASI, who spun round and has chosen to retire. But as I was saying, if you can fight through the Vale chicane out of club, you could probably end up fighting through Farm and Abbey, because the exit out of club slingshots you up into turn 1, and then after you've fought through there, you've got Village and Aintree, which is a nice little looping section. Then that DRS zone up into Brooklands and Luffield, where these drivers are now. If you get a good enough slingshot out of Luffield, as hopefully Knight has done so, you can see that Delta, however, falling away. You could have stuck it alongside through Cops. It's difficult to do so and risky to do so, hence why you don't see many drivers doing that nowadays. But if they can do it, you can try and fight a bit in Magus and Beckett's. It's a very risky overtaking opportunity pretty much throughout that latter half of the middle sector. Then you've got the other DRS zone of the Hangar Straight up into Stowe Corner. Knight looks to the inside of Duncan, wasn't able to do so, and that is pretty much a lap of battles if you stage it all correctly. And I'm pretty sure we will see at least 2 cars go fighting for at least 3 corners on the bounce, if that be Farm, Abbey, Village, Aintree and Loop, or if it's just Brooklands, Luffield, Woodcote. It's still a battle and a half, to say the least, as Duncan still leading away after the first 5 laps in this race. It really just shows that it's so difficult to drop off the deficit, because Duncan's probably pushing like mad, so is Knight, and they just aren't getting anywhere. You can see these cars in a pretty much straightforward DRS train down the whole field, and then Paul just 8 seconds off into the view in his own rail, to say the least, as Mad Dogs now in P5. The V-Carb doing a fairly decent job, however they would need a podium to take a place ahead of Connor at least, as the gap between the championship leader and this V-Carb is 14 points as things stand. But for Duncan, it could be revolutionary. He'd be increasing his points margin to about 30-ish. That would put him in amongst the top 6 as things would stand. As into the pits comes Mad Dogs. It's an early stop. It's the mediums coming on now. We will chuck on position change just so you can see after these pit stops or whatever the changing in positions up and down the pecking order. But yeah, currently it will be Duncan who still leads. There's not been a move for a lead, but there's a big snap there by Knight. The Sauber starting to struggle a bit for the rear grip. Of course, Oast is the process of the rear sliding around, and that is what we've just witnessed with the Sauber. Looks like they are starting to struggle a bit with those tyres. We've only been racing for 6 laps. However, the dirty air is absolutely crucial in a race like this, as now Willow works their way up into Cops. Again, not really any moves happening whatsoever. This track quite heavily dominated based off who gets pole does win, unless the undercut comes into play. That's what Mad Dogs and Cicada has done, but you may want to see what tyres they're on. They're both on the hard compound, so they are going to try and take them maybe to the end. I've seen in other leagues people have gone from lap 5 to take those hards to the end, and they've just hung on by a thread. But then I've seen other times where they've put them on lap 10 and they're punctured on lap 26. So it's about how good you are managing those tyres. This race really going to be about massaging them, getting them into a rhythm, not wearing them out too much. And if you wear them out too much, it will of course end up devastatingly. But for the time being, these are leaders just trying to extend their strategies as long as possible, as WOR has called it quits, which is a shame, because everyone who finishes now is destined to get at least 1 point to their name. But that will not be the case for the McLaren or the Mercedes, as it will be a pointless event for those two drivers of WOR and Assi. And that does really make this championship a bit more straightforward, because as long as Alpine bag, top 6 actually, they will promote themselves into 7th on this championship. And for Aston Martin, it's a straightforward battle between them and McLaren, because it's 3 points apart of them. As things would stand, it would be RWB who promotes the Aston Martin up into 5th in this championship as they work their way up into Stowe Corner. Still no moves yet to come. So this is going to be a fairly long-winding event, but this is just these drivers racing at their absolute best. And that is just not what's able to happen. As now we progress on to the lap 8 of 26. To say the least, the drivers starting to struggle. They'll probably be aching in terms of their arms. That Magnussen-Beckett section does kill someone's core body strength. It's a difficult track to run 26 laps of on the back of one another. However, Cicada on those hard compounded tyres finding some pace. He's now the fastest man out on track, as it will be very interesting to see how they will differ, as they are closing in on Mad Dogs ever so slightly, and it's safe to assume they're both finding about, I want to say, 4 or 5 tenths a lap on Mulder in that McLaren, who's sticking quite nicely to the back of this group, even though he's 2 seconds back and slowly dropping. He isn't dropping at too alarming of a rate for the McLaren, as Knight now working their way down the back straight. You can see the drivers again just trying to find a way by, unable to do so, however, as we will quickly ride on board through Knight as they go through Vale, as the Sauber, you can see based off the ERS they've not got too much, but they're going to be deploying everywhere they can. For example, on that Hamilton straight, as you've just seen, that little usage of the extra battery, and then it's through Village, low speed, understeer is quite thrown with the dirty air of the car ahead. It does make racing in a train fairly difficult, and that's where a driver would want to try and break out from that dirty air for brief moments throughout a lap, as Mad Dogs has set your fastest lap of race. Currently it's 8th and 9th, trading them. Only on lap 8 it was Cicada, lap 9, well, whatever it was Mad Dogs. So the laps starting to drop quite quickly by them, and they are now within 18 seconds of Mulder. The gap pretty much plummeting at this point, as questions are now being asked. Are they trying to play a blind in strategy, find a massive undercut? Because here pit stop's about 24 seconds. I can tell you for a fact they are definitely within 24 seconds of your race lead. As you could see there, VXR breaking out of that dirty air, taking a bit of clean air on the hangar straight. As into the pits comes Duncan and Knight. The top two have charged into the pit lane, so has Simone. but that will change your current pecking order. It will be Willow who now leads us onto the 10th lap here, as it's Williams who now leads. However, they are vulnerable of dropping quite a way back due to the undercuts in this race. However, if you want to try and make a one-stop work to perfection, I'd recommend lap 12 before diverting off those mediums onto the hard compounded tyres. But you could probably get away with it from about lap 9 if you nurture those hards to perfection, as of course Mad Dogs has left the pit lane as your race leader. Cicada just behind in the Alpine, so that is going to be your main fight for the race lead here today, or at least for the time being, of course. So let's be honest, those two probably won't be able to make the one-stop stick, but could very much be in for a shot if they can manage the tyres. That's going to be the main storyline here today. Will these two be able to fend off on those older tyres, or do they have to resort to an alternate strategy, maybe a two-stop, try and find that time in the final 5 laps or so, and if they can do it, win that way. Otherwise it will have to be them trying to fight for dear life with the likes of Duncan and Knight. As into the pits comes Willow and VXR. The Aston Martin of RWB opts to stay out, however, as Willow, 10-second penalty for speeding into the pit lane. He went a bit too quick, beyond that 37-mile-an-hour speed limiter, and therefore they have been sanctioned quite heavily. As a result, it will either be served in their next pit stop or post-race with a time penalty, as the Aston Martin a bit unsettled out of village. Quite a bit of oversteer was seen, to say the least, as you can see Simon working their way through Farm, and now Abbey just behind VXR, just wasn't close enough to overtake the Red Bull, but in a place where they'll go to the inside and village. There's some banging of wheels between the two, as it looks like Simone, who's got those heated up hard compounded tyres, using DRS now up towards Brooklands. Can the Ferrari take P8? Yes, he will, as that is Simone up into the top 8 once again, and that is VXR struggling off the bat of those new tyres. Just shows how one lap of tyre preparation can change everything in these races, as that is probably your first on-track overtake since the opening lap, as that just proves how difficult it is to overtake here today. But to say the least, they've done it in a fairly artistically fashion. They caught the driver head off guard, they saw the weakness and executed a perfect move. As there's Duncan trying to look for a move on Cicada. They're going to look to the inside there for Vale. They choose otherwise, as the Alpine locks the front left on entry out of the Vale chicane into club corner. Now Simone Mara has once again disconnected. It's really just not been his friend today. He's even cussed out EA servers for their internet already in this event, as there goes Duncan looking to the outside through village, as there goes Knight. He's gone for an opportunity, he saw the door open, he's going to try and strike. It's going to be a chivalrous attempt. However, the Sauber knows he wasn't close enough to make it stick, unlike Simone, who managed to make it stick first time of asking last lap. As now Cicada will be holding these lots up, as Mad Dogs is going to start pulling away a bit in this race mode. Of course, on those hard compounded tyres, it's going to be quite optimal that they stay out on it, as there's Duncan who's overtaken Cicada on the exit of Copse Corner. There's your position change. However, it's Mulder who's gained 4 places from his start position, but your highest gainers being, well, was Mad Dogs and Cicada. Now it's just Cicada's. Mad Dogs has dropped to P3 with Duncan making a move into Stowe, but there's Knight on the inside of Cicada. He's got past the Alpine, he's going to look to the inside for Vale chicane. Both cars lock up and the Sauber up into P3. He's trying to match Duncan every way possible, and that is the best way to do it, as there was Mad Dogs trying to give Cicada a squeeze. Didn't want to lose too many places in a matter of corners, but VXR, however, amongst all of that, is your fastest man out on track. So your most positions gained being Cicada and Mulder, with 4 places gained across this race. In terms of most places lost, it is Simone. However, they have disconnected twice. They didn't take the start procedure, as they've asked for someone to invite back. So I'm just going to say add me. Yeah, that was really good set of moves, to say the least, for Mad Dogs and Cicada. I'm just going to see if he sent me any. No, he hasn't, so yeah, as there's Mad Dogs going rather wide through Cop's corner, and therefore getting a 3-second track limits penalty for multiple warnings. Probably the first warning. As now out of Chapel onto the hanger straight up towards Stowe. You can see in the background VXR to the inside of Willow. That is going to be the Red Bull up into 6th place here today. An easy move made for the Red Bull. He saw an opportunity when the car ahead didn't have DRS, and he seized it to perfection. As now VXR can try and hunt down these two just up ahead. VXR again, fastest lap of the race. Those hard compounder tyres really working for the Red Bull here, surprisingly, after struggling quite a bit in qualifying, only going 10th fastest, and then setting mediocre pace in the opening stint on those mediums. This really came alive now on these hards, as Cicada has got a bit of company now as they work their way down to Brooklands. Is the Red Bull going to go for a move? No, he's just a tiny bit too far back, as I'll quickly send an invite to Simone for you lot, so he can actually get back into this race and go racing. Of course, as long as you cross the line, you should become a classified finisher. As there we go, I've just sent him an invite, and now we are back to the racing, going through Magus and Beckes. Now you can just see how close the Red Bull gets to the Alpine, as that's VXR trying to overtake the Alpine, but pace really just not playing along here today. It's not looking too easy for it, as Mulder has now pitted in McLaren, as there contact as Cicada defended late, as VXR just manages to switch back, gets the move done after going into the back of the Alpine, as now Willow is on the back of the team in pink and blue, pretty much candy floss colours, as Willow trying to find a way by in British Racing Green. He said he can't see invites, so I'll send one more. Sorry for this, guys. As there's contact, Cicada basically drifting off the road there, as now Willow drops back. He's gone, you know what, I'll play fair. I'll be the better man. I won't forfeit a penalty for taking someone out. Instead, I'll let him by and then overtake him in long run. However, that's allowed RWB to gain 2 places. In amongst that, they went from losing 1 place in this race to now gaining 1 in terms of where they've started. In terms of tyres, it's looking quite different. Of course, those on the hards and mediums pretty much inverted from those who started on mediums and hards. But in the case of Mulder, he's on brand spanking new mediums. He should go flying in this final part of the race. Whereas on the other hand, the likes of Cicada and Mad Dogs, as you've seen, are struggling to say the least. They do not have the tyre grip on those 9-lap-old hards compared to the 5-lap-old hards. As into the pits comes Willow, the the Williams, getting another 10-second penalty for speeding into the pit lane. You can see them now limping down with now 20 seconds to serve, but they can of course only serve 1 penalty at a time in a stop and go. But the fight continues up front. It's Duncan versus Knight, Sauber versus Haas, only time will tell who will win. They've been top two pretty much all race. Of course, Mad Dogs and Cicada took it for a set period of time when, of course, they were not on the pressure compounds when they made the undercut on the leaders. But now that's been reverted, and these two going back underway. Duncan versus Knight, they're 3.7 seconds clear of VXR. The race is pretty much going to be settled based off the outcome of this duel. But you do have VXR, who's been finding quite a lot of pace in this stint. He set quite a few fastest laps of the race on those 5 laps using the hards. So do not rule that Red Bull out in terms of possible win contention, as the Sauber pretty much understeering, then having a little snap. But who has a bigger snap is Duncan. There's subtle alterations in the steering angle from Knight. However, Duncan literally had to start steering the opposite way to keep it on the road there. That's pretty much counter steering at its finest. However, these two are going to start pushing each other to the very limits. We've seen some of that already today. However, Mulder, fastest man on track, is at 28.5 for the McLaren. This is going to be the redemption arc in this race. The McLaren has to find as much time as possible between now and the final lap in this race. I'll be honest, I see a top 5 being very much a possibility, with them only being 6.8 off of Cicada and a further 1.5 off of Mad Dogs. Knight's going through the right hander now, as the Sauber works their way as close to the back of Duncan as possible. The DRS detection point, of course, at start of Magus and Beckett, so as long as you can stay within DRS range out of cops, you've got it for this hanger straight. So despite dropping back about a tenth or two through Magus and Beckett, he will keep that DRS and just try and close in as much as they can at this point. Knight now going through Vale out of Club Corner now. The Sauber has to find a way by. Sauber's championship is depending on it. They're on 9 points compared to Haas's 18. So to be honest, whatever way this race goes, both teams will be above 20 points, and that will be every single constructor that has scored 20 points so far this season. As now down the Wellington Straight up into turn 6 of Brooklands, the Sauber gets close, but just not close enough once again. The battle rather dragging itself out, to say the least. But could we be in store for a last lap overtake for the win, as Knight is pretty much trying to stay identical in terms of how much he pushes compared to Duncan, as Willow fastest lap of the race is 28.1 for the Williams. Of course 29 seconds back, so they're kind of in their own world in this race, of course, having to serve that 10-second penalty, then getting a further 10-second penalty on top of it. It's just not been an ideal race for one of the championship candidates. They're currently 4th, 27 points off Connor, and this race really has fallen flat on its face, to say the least, as Knight should be your championship leader after this race, with Connor probably sitting in P2 still, then Mad Dogs 3rd, Willow 4th. So yeah, we will just sit back and wait, because we are still 7 laps out from the finish here, and you do have Duncan versus Knight, and then just a bit further back in P5, Mad Dogs versus Cicada for pretty much your win and your top 5 finish position. They're your 2 closest battles out on track. However, do not rule out VXR and RWB. The Aston Martin and Red Bull flirting with that 1 second margin. However, who's flirting with gaining the race lead is the Sauber of Knight, getting rather close through Luffield. Doesn't get the best of exit as a result. Took a fairly tight line on entry, does widen the line on exit, gets on a bit of those marbles. The dirtier tarmac struggles with the exit more than anything, but that does cool those fronts a bit more, sitting in the dirty air all race of that Haas car, it must be killing the Sauber. Just looking at that Toyota Gazoo rear wing pretty much non-stop. However, if you guys are a fan of this, do check out some of our sponsors of Grid, if I'm right it's Gridline and Next Level Racing. So yeah, do check them out in your spare time. However, for the time being, it's Knight versus Duncan, two of your, well, racer leaders, of course being first and second. They've been first and second for, let's say, 18 of these laps. They only sat behind Mad Dogs and Cicada for about 2 laps before they got past them both. As now the Sauber using DRS heading up into Brooklands. Can Knight overtake Duncan? Just not close enough, as I'm pretty sure I've just seen a bit of rain. So these drivers possibly preparing for the intermediate conditions come the end of this race. Things are about to heat up, as you can see on the green visor. Yes, it's fairly vague, but you can see raindrops falling here. We are having a full-on British race, with the dries, with the wet conditions as well. We are getting some of everything, and some cocky, well, ballsy overtaking, to say the least, in Village. As up towards Stoke Corner now, Knight has to try and seize one of these opportunities, because when it starts raining, it's going to become so much more difficult to overtake. DRS becomes a thing of the past. Racecraft becomes a thing of the now when that does kick in. So for the sake of the Sauber, they have to overtake Duncan in order to take this win. But then, could they pit a lap earlier if they do think it's going to go to the intermediate? As 2 drivers into the pits, that's of Mad Dogs and Cicadas. There goes Knight to the inside of Duncan. He's caught the Haas off guard. Surely the Sauber can promote themselves. They're drifting off the line. The wetter patches of the track really making the Sauber struggle, but they'll use DRS up towards Brooklands now. Duncan really doesn't choose to fight it off, as they now go through Brooklands up towards the Luffield. The Haas still on the inside. They're pushing each other to their absolute maximum, as it's going to be Knight who now leads your British GP here in WOR, and that is a brilliant piece of racing for the two. But Duncan is going to try and come back at him to the outside through Copse Corner. Thought there was a move, instead goes off the road, and that is the Sauber defending to absolute brilliance after being vulnerable immediately after making a move, as Mad Dogs and Cicada have opted for the intermediates already. Is it going to get that damp? However, as you can see, Knight with Duncan behind, VXR starting to catch the two after their massive battle at the start of this lap. But for the time being, it will now be the Cream that are on the top, and then the American-based team sitting behind with, don't rule out Red Bull anymore, they're your current Constructors' Championship leader on 80 points this season, which is 71 more points than the team that is leading this race of Sauber. It's going to be interesting to see whether or not this team can fend off, however, in the long run. But RWB also in that Aston Martin starting to close in a bit. RWB has had 2 finishes. One of them was a DNF, the other one was a P2, and that was the last time out in round 5. As round 5? I don't think round 6 was updated, that's why. But in terms of this race now, you do have 4-way fight for this lead. Could you even include Mad Dogs and Cicada if that gap drops far enough? Very much so. However, it does not look like it's going to get wet enough. We're on the 22nd lap here at Silverstone. The rain's starting to pour and the drivers starting to squirrel about. You could just see that back end of the Sauber out of Beckus and into Chapel. It really did not want to stick to the ground, as there goes Duncan to the outside of Knight. Surely it's the race lead once again for the Haas. They're going to work their way down through the Vale Bank up into the Vale Chicane now, and it's going to be Duncan who leads. Both cars squirreling under brakes. The wet patches starting to kick in as the cars fighting for dear life here over the line, and it'll be Duncan who leads us onto the 23rd lap, but will Knight be able to fight back? Pretty much all of these cars in the top 4 struggling in terms of grip. Could it be Inters? As you can see, Duncan drifting through Village has to defend Knight quite tightly into the loop as the Sauber snapping out of that corner onto the main straight now as DRS in use, but that big snap really reduces their traction on the exit, flat spots the tyres a bit and puts them on back foot. When it came to attacking into Brooklands, didn't manage to do so, as it's going to beg a question: is it wet enough, or is it going to be worth the gamble to take it to the end on these hards? Because at the moment these drivers are fighting relentlessly irrespective of the weather. As currently Knight now goes through Magus and Beckett. It's all about how much traction they can keep through this high downforce part of the Silverstone circuit. Dry tyres on a wet track doesn't necessarily go too well, however they've all kept it clean. Knight now trying to close in on Duncan, just not close enough however to try and go for a move, as I'll be honest, if you wanted to pit for Inters you would have had to do it a while ago. But into the pits comes Knight. The Sauber and the Aston Martin have gone, you know what, I'm going to take a pit stop in this race, as Duncan and VXR have stayed out. Is it going to be dry enough for them to go to the end is the question, or is it going to be wet enough for the Sauber and the Aston Martin to work their way back up through the field? For the argument of Mad Dogs and Cicada, they really aren't changing in terms of their delta to Willow. They are pretty much matching the Williams' pace. So I'll be honest, I don't think it is wet enough for the Inters, and if it is wet enough, it's definitely not wet enough to gain enough to overtake. As up into Brooklands, it's going to be VXR versus Duncan here now for the lead. Simone up into P3 with Knight in 4th now on those intermediate tyres. The Red Bull quite close to the back of the Haas in respect to where they were only a lap ago. They were about 1.2 off of Duncan, however they did get a slingshot into the Vale Chicane, and that did help them find about 4 or 5 temps on the Haas car. Out of Cops now, up towards Magus and Beckett. It's all going to be about the traction zones here, because that is how the drivers are going to try and escape one another in these tricky conditions. But may the best man win now. There's a big snap of oversteer there for VXR as they work their way down the hangar straight now up to Stowe Corner. The Red Bull just not close enough to go for a move, however. It's going to be Duncan who fends the lead once again as we are about to enter the penultimate lap. These drivers have not opted to pit, and you can see Knight and RWB just not catching enough to really compete for the lead. They've only gained 3 seconds this lap on Simone, and I'll be honest, more than anything, Simone's dropped about a second to these top 2. Even though they are fighting like absolute bonkers, they are still pulling away from 3rd place, as VXR trying to take a wider line through Village, set them up a bit more through the loop. A bit of a wobble on the exit for Duncan, however, as they now enter the Wellington Straight up towards Brooklands and Luffield. The Red Bull just not close enough to go for moves. Cicada 3-second penalty for track limits warnings, as we can tune in with Knight as he's all over the back of the Ferrari, whose massive snap of oversteer there on the exit of Village through Raintree. The move was done for Knight, and that is the Sauber back up into P3 here, as Duncan is still your race leader. Of course, he's led most of this race in that Haas, however he's been far from getting it the easy way. More than anything, he's had someone on his back all race. He's had literally Knight up his chuff since lap 1 until he pitted, and then when he pitted, he then has had VXR pushing him to his absolute maximum. However, for the man who DNF'd in the season opener and came P7 in the third race. DRS is now disabled for the sake of VXR. That is crucial, because that was probably his sole way of overtaking, but it means one lap of pure and hard racing between the top two now. Who is going to be your race winner? Will it be Duncan or will it be VXR? Haas versus Red Bull, 9th in the championship versus 1st in championship. As up to Village, down the inside goes VXR. He's seen the gap, he's going to go for it. It's all or nothing now. To the inside for the loop, just not close enough to fully stick a nose in. As out of the loop now, through Aintree they go, heading on to the Wellington Straight. Is there going to be a move? It's going to all be about using absolute at maximum in terms of their battery. To the inside for Brooklands goes VXR. They're going to hold the outside for Luffield Curve, as they will now take your race lead as long as they can get the traction out of Brooklands, which they do so. Duncan struggling for dear life about several corrections, just heading up towards Woodcott, and that is now the Red Bull in the lead. The best result this man has had all season is 2nd place, and that was in round 2 and 3. He's going to be your race winner unless Duncan can take it away from him between Chapel, which is now, and the finish line. That is 3 corners, but the gap is plummeting. It's a bit too far back now. Unless VXR does drop the ball, it's never a zero possibility. However, it's unlikely. These drivers have drove stellar in these conditions, as after all the pain Duncan's gone through, he's going to have to take home 2nd, as it's going to be the Red Bull who win for the first time this season. Your season 21 round 7 winner is VXR, followed by Duncan. Then it's going to be a mess night in that Sauber over the line. The intergamble definitely did not pay off, but he dropped the gap by half of it in 3 laps. RWB comes home P4 with Simone rounding off to take home P5 in that Ferrari. It's not the result he would have hoped, but it's a result for the team more or less, as it's Mad Dog 6th, Cicada 7th, Willow working his way through the final few corners now, struggling to say the least in that Williams. It's going to be P8 for Willow, and Mulder over the line now will take home P9, but will get promoted to P8 as a repercussion of Willow's unserved 10-second stop and go for speeding into the pit lane. Of course, he did get 2, but yeah, that is, to say the least, a hard fought win for VXR. It's a shame, because Duncan did lead pretty much most of that race. He led the whole of the first stint. He led the majority of that 2nd stint until when Knight overtook. Then he dived into the pits. Duncan regained the lead properly, and then VXR went for a last minute lunge, and that grabbed the Red Bull the win here in Silverstone. There's some of your race attributes. Your winner, VXR. Driver of the day, VXR. Willow has your fastest lap. Then it's Mulder, most overtakes, and your cleanest driver, Duncan. As your final finish result will be VXR, who wins by 1.363 seconds over Duncan in the Haas, followed by Knight in the Sauber. RWB comes home 4th. Simone will finish your top 5 in 5th. Mad Dogs comes home 6th. Cicada 7th. Mulder in 8th. Willow 9th, due to that 10 seconds. And then it's Paul and Assy in 10th and 11th, both failing to finish. But that has been season 21, round 7 here at Silverstone. I hope you guys have all enjoyed. It's been me, Cryptic Commentates, and I will hopefully be back to commentate next week. Goodbye.